Moving is the worst. Moving is one of those occasional necessities in life that depletes you in just about every possible way. Even when it's a good move, it's still uprooting your life like that is always a risk. And I was moving as a single mom with a 2-year-old. And I hadn't figured out how to single parent the way that I wanted to in Boston, where I was living. And so I decided to take a couple years off and go to the small town in upstate New York where my parents lived. And I had rented the top half of a lovely little painted lady, Queen Anne Victorian, and I had spent the entire day hauling boxes from my rusted Ford Escort and the little U-Haul trailer I was pulling behind it up the long, narrow stairway to our adorable new apartment. I was on the last load. I had a laundry basket full of toys on one hip and my very tired 2-year-old son, Shane, on my other hip. And I paused for a minute outside the house and I looked at the porch stairs and I thought, can I really go up these stairs one more time? And I happened to look around and I caught up in the second floor window of the house next door the most angry, twisted, furious, frightening face just glaring down at me. And if I had not been forewarned about this person, I think I would have peed myself. But earlier that day, the neighbors on the other side had come over to introduce themselves. And about 30 seconds into the conversation with them, the wife had leaned over and like half whispered as if he could hear from 2 doors down, "Have you met old Bill?" And the husband said, "Do yourself a favor. Keep clear." And the wife said, "He's the town crank." And the guy said, "You'll see." And we did see. We were moving in spring, and all through that spring and summer, we saw Bill being Bill. Woe to the person who walked their dog past his house and the dog peed on his lawn, or the guy that checked the meter made too much noise, or the guy that handled his garbage cans was too rough. Every interaction with other people was anger, anger, anger. But we never really interacted with him. His whole house was kind of clamped down. He never opened his windows, he never opened his doors. What the neighbors didn't know when they told me about Bill was that after a very chaotic and dysfunctional childhood, I found myself at age 28 really not very good at connecting with people in any real kind of way. And I was glad Bill was like he was. And I wished all the neighbors were like Bill so that I would never have to interact with them. But not so much Shane. My son Shane was not having a chaotic and dysfunctional childhood. He was having a very positive childhood. And by the time we'd been there for 6 months or so, he was 2.5, he started to notice Bill and make little overtures towards him. And it was amazing to watch from somebody who didn't know how to do that. It was amazing to watch this kid. So he started out by, we would be playing in the front yard and he'd be looking at Bill's house. And if he saw him in the window, he'd wave to him, and Bill would slam his curtains shut if he ever got caught watching. And then later on in the fall, we'd be outside raking the leaves, and Shane would kind of just walk over until he was in front of Bill's house, and he'd be kicking the leaves over to our yard, or he'd pick up a few leaves in his hands and come put them in our pile. And then winter and the snow came, and Shane had his own little toy shovel, and I'd be shoveling the walk, and he'd be, throwing a couple of snowflakes. I'd look up, and he'd be over trying to shovel Bill's front walk. Shortly after that, we were making muffins, and Shane said, "I want to take a muffin to Bill." And I said, "All right, okay, if that's what you want to do, we'll do that. Here, put it on this plate, and we'll take it over." So this was his deal. So I stood on the sidewalk, and I watched, and this little kid, he's not even 3 yet, and he's got it on the plate, he's trying to balance it and catch it every once in a while, and he gets up, he goes up the 3 front stairs, and he reaches up to the doorbell, and he rings it, and Bill comes and answers the door. and I'm watching their interaction. They chat for a minute, and I was happy to see that Bill took the muffin. So Shane comes back, and he's all excited. He says, Bill says we can come back for the plate tomorrow, and can we come in for tea? And I was like, oh, okay, sure, we'll do it. Well, it's fine, right? I don't want to hold my kid back, all right? So the next day, we go over in the morning, knock on the door. Bill answers instantly. We walk in. His house is immaculate. It's not normal immaculate. It's like OCD immaculate. And there's not a lot of stuff. It's very spare, but not spare because he doesn't have any money. It's spare because he just doesn't want to have a lot of stuff in his house. He smells like shaving cream, and I notice a little piece of tissue with a circle of blood on his neck. So obviously he'd cleaned up for company. And he leads us into the kitchen, and he's got a little Formica top table there with aluminum chairs, and we sit down, and I have some awkward small talk with him because I'm bad at small talk and he's bad at small talk. Shane has brought 2 cars, and he's driving them around the table, you know. And Bill just abandons trying to have small talk with me, and he picks up his spoon and he puts it down in front of Shane's car. And he says, "You're going to have to turn around. There's been an accident here. A log truck has spilled its load." And that was it for Shane. Really, from that moment on, they were the best of friends. And over the next several months, we spent quite a bit of time with him. I mean, honestly, we kind of folded our lives together. Shane and I would have dinner, and I would make some extra. I would take it over to him, and sometimes he would do the same for us. I would help him if he had errands that he needed to run and so on. And Shane was very, very excited to be friends with Bill. He didn't want to talk about himself very much, but I did find out that he was a widower. His wife had been dead for 17 years, and he had 2 daughters who lived right there in town, like literally a few blocks away, that wanted nothing to do with him. And I tried to talk to him about, what's up with, and he would just stiffen up. And I could tell from his body language that he didn't want to go there. So I never found out what it was. Problem I started to have was that I never intended to leave the city permanently. I knew eventually I was going to go back. I'm a professional musician. I couldn't really, make a living in Watertown, New York as a musician. I decided it was about time to tell Bill that I was thinking that in the next few months we would be leaving. I went to tell him. Shane was asleep, and I told the neighbors downstairs that I was going next door. He took it pretty hard. I mean, he clammed up, but he just kind of sat there and stared, and I realized that he was staring at the one piece of art that he had on his wall, and that was one of those free drugstore calendars that he had tacked to the wall over the kitchen table, and hanging next to it was a black marker on a piece of twine. And Bill had a routine. Every night after he ate his dinner, he would wash his dishes, dry them, put them away, go put on his pajamas, and come back out and make a perfect black X over that day. And I was looking at the whole month leading up to the day I was sitting there, and I saw all those X'd out days. And very neatly tucked into the corner of the shelf underneath was a stack of about 12 calendars from prior years. After that, I got a call from Bill. I'd been gone all day long, and I got home. There was a message on voicemail from him on the answering machine. It said, "Can you come and get me? I'm at the emergency room. I've been here all day." So I jump in the car, I go over to the emergency room, and there he is. He's in his pajamas. He's been there for 7 hours. He said, "I wasn't feeling well this morning, so I called an ambulance, and I had my pajamas on, so I don't have my wallet, and I couldn't pay a cabbie, and I called my daughter, but she never showed, and I didn't know how to get home, so I gave him a ride home." The second time that happened, this young doctor came over to me, and he said, "Listen, I want to talk to you. I know Bill doesn't have any family to speak of, but I know that he's fond of you. And I want you to know that I think that he is mismanaging his diabetes on purpose for attention. I gave the doctor my number, and I said, you know what, if there's anything I can do, let me know. All I can do is encourage him to be healthy and talk to him and try to keep an eye on him. And so that's what I did. A little bit after that, Bill called me up one night again. Shane was asleep, and he said, come over, I've got to talk to you. So I went over, and he says, I've been thinking, I could move to Boston with you. It sounded like an outlandish idea to me, but I hadn't seen him that happy in a long time, and I didn't want to just shoot him down. So I said to him, you're going to sell your house? Because you can't just leave it empty. You'll have to find all new doctors and get your prescriptions switched over. And he knew very quickly that it just wasn't going to happen. He was about 78 years old, and he'd lived in Watertown his whole life. He wasn't going to pick up and move to Boston. A couple days later, he called me again, and I went back, and this time he was old Bill. He was angry. He was mean. He said to me, you don't belong here. You need to get out of this town. You're 29 years old, and you're not getting any younger, and you got nothing going on. I knew he was grieving. I didn't want to engage him, so I just said, all right, Bill, thanks for letting me know how you feel. Good night. The next morning, Shane woke up, and he really wanted to go see Bill. I didn't really want to go see Bill, but he really wanted to see Bill, and he was at this stage in his development where he would say your name over and over again until you acknowledged him. I don't know if any of you know any toddlers. So if I was talking to somebody and he had something important to say, or if I was on the phone, it was like, Mom, 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 Mom. So all morning, he's like, Bill, I want to see Bill. We have to go see Bill. So if I was like, okay, fine, we'll go see Bill, right? After breakfast, we'll clean up, we'll go to see Bill. We walk downstairs and out the front door, and it's autumn now, and it's very, very windy, and the wind is blowing my hair all over the place. And Shane's so excited, he just runs across the yard and right up Bill's back stairs and into his back door. And I thought, that's weird, because Bill never leaves his doors open. And then I hear loud music coming out of Bill's house, and all his windows are open. I'm like, okay, he never opens his windows. He never listens to loud music. This is making me really uncomfortable. So I run up the stairs, and I have my hand on the doorknob, and I hear, Bill, 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 Bill. And I open the door, and there is my 3-year-old on all fours with his face inches away from Bill's purple mottled face. Bill was a big man, and he had fallen in between the living room and the kitchen, and he took up almost the whole length of the room. I saw that his mouth was wide open, and his eyes looked like they were looking up at his glasses, which had flown onto his forehead when he had fallen over like a felled tree. And there's Shane. Bill's arms were all splotched with lividity, which is what happens when you've been dead for a few hours. And the wind was blowing his curtains. And Roger Miller, King of the Road, was like at volume 10, like echoing through the whole room. And it was one of the most surreal moments of my life, and I felt my stomach just clench up like a fist. And I kind of panicked. I ran over to Shane, and I picked him up, and I said, Bill's sleeping. Don't wake him up. We got to get out of here. So I had to undo that later. Those of you who don't have experience with children, we never equate death and sleep. Really a bad idea. So anyway, you're going to sleep now, honey. No. I took him over to the next door neighbor. I came back over, I turned off the music, I called an ambulance, and he had his 2 daughters' phone numbers right there next to the phone. And I called the first one, there was no answer. Called the second one, And a woman answered right away. And I said, "This is your father's neighbor, and your father's passed away." And I pictured her showing up like after he was on a gurney under a sheet, but she didn't. She got there before the ambulance did, like literally within 2 minutes. Now she shows up. She goes rushing over to him and starts trying to pry the wedding ring off his finger. After the ambulance came and they drove him away, I stood on the sidewalk next to her, watching it go, and she turned to me and she said, "Don't think you're going to get anything." So, Shane and I dealt with Bill's death in very different ways. Shane had a lot of questions that were difficult to answer, and as he got older, the questions got a little more complicated, and I tried to cobble something together for him. But by the time he was 6 years old, he had a full-fledged existential crisis. I was driving around, we were doing a whole bunch of errands, it was raining out, we had to grab some lunch real quick before we went on to the next thing, and we stopped at a gas station and grabbed a couple sandwiches, and we sat in the car to eat, and the rain's coming down the windshield, and I take a bite of my tuna sandwich. Don't get tuna at a gas station. I take a bite of my tuna sandwich and I say, "Oh, this tastes really not so great. I hope I don't get food poisoning." And Shane instantly lunges across the seat, grabs the tuna sandwich out of my hand, and takes a giant bite of it. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "If you die, I want to die. And furthermore, why are we even here if we're going to die? What's the point?" And I thought, all right, I got to give this kid something. And you know what? I didn't have heaven to give him. To me, I'm sorry, heaven is a cop-out. I don't believe in it, and I wasn't going to lie to my kid. So what I said to him, I took his beautiful little face in my hands, and I said, "Do you not go to the carnival because you have to go home at the end of the day?" And he kind of stared at me. And he stopped asking questions about death from that moment on. He did. Me, in the months after Bill's death, I was filled with guilt and self-recrimination because that doctor had called me up after Bill died and said he took a fatal dose of insulin. And I thought, why? Why did you do that to that man? He had his ordered life, and you came in and you interjected yourself, and you brought him to the point where he'd kill himself. And the more I thought about it, I thought, you know what, that is really arrogant. To think that you can make that kind of decision for another cognizant adult human being. Bill was the one who opened the door. He opened the door to a child. He let some love in his life. He spent the last 6 months of his life or so probably happier than he had ever been. You've got to go through life detaching yourself from outcomes. That's what I finally figured out. You have to be a decent human being. You can give compassion and companionship and care to the people who are right in front of your face. And whatever happens after that, it happens. We are not in control of it. And it took several more years for me to fully realize the extent of the healing that raising my son was for me. Because I was able to relive the parent-child dynamic in a way that was right and healthy and nurturing. And I came out of it like a kid that had been raised right. And my son is grown now, and I still think about all the lessons that I learned from him. But I really, truly, I think the number one lesson that I learned was go to the carnival. Go to the carnival. Thank you.